Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alastair.
And this fortnight, we are discussing the second season of animated anthology series Star Wars Visions, including, of course, our top 3 favourite episodes, as we do for all these anthology shows. And then we'll be covering the first issue of new comic World Tree, written by James Tynion IV and drawn by Fernando Blanco, and giving us a horrific vision of the internet, as if the real one was not enough. But before those two things, Alastair, what else you done?
Well, I've been going back to what was, I think, the original recommendation when we did the tag team recommendations way back when we started this podcast in 2016. And I've been reading Manhattan Projects.
Oh, good choice.
Yeah, which is a comic that Nick recommended to me. And yeah, just to briefly fill people in, it's an alternative history sci-fi comic that sort of begins at the end of World War II and imagines the Manhattan Projects and various real people from history if they sort of embarked on bizarre and usually quite dark and strange sci-fi adventures. It's really, really imaginative, I think it's the thing. It's just like, always coming up with creative new plot twists and strange things to go on, including like FDR being turned into a computer, various like ancient cults and things that try to take them over. There's adventures in space with aliens, alternative dimensions, duplicates. It's like a real cavalcade of sci-fi storytelling. Featuring a whole range of like historical figures. Robert Oppenheimer's one of the main characters, Albert Einstein, FDR, Richard Ferryman, William Westmoreland, Leslie Grove, Yuri Gagarin. I don't know, if you're into your history, I'd certainly recommend this, and if you're into sort of just bizarre stories, I'd recommend it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I of course recommended this to Alastair, so I did also like it. But yeah, this is an extremely good comic. This was one of the first comics by Jonathan Hickman I read, who has, of course, gone on to become one of the dominant writers in sort of Western sci-fi-ish comics, especially after his big reinvention of the X-Men from a few years back, which we also covered. But yeah, this was extremely good. I actually reread this to read the last couple of books I hadn't read, I think 6 months or so ago. And yeah, this is still extremely fun. Yeah, the constant appetite for bigger, more bizarre adventures. And also I think the character stuff is good. The characters actually feel like distinct individuals interacting, and their interactions are what cause a lot of the plot moves. Some people accuse Hickman of being a bit of a plot-dominated writer, or sort of plot and world building, look at my big ideas, as opposed to character stuff. But I think this is one of the series where the character stuff really works as well, which is why I think it's still one of his best series.
Yeah, the characters come through in a strong way. I think he's taken a lot of liberties with history, shall we say. I mean, he's kind of like imposed his own, funny enough, he's imposed his own characters kind of on top of the historical ones, which is kind of what you need for this sort of thing. I don't know, there's a sort of space adventurer version of Einstein carrying a big gun and sort of shooting aliens on strange planets, which is very funny. If nothing else. I've read it in sort of 6 collector's volumes, so it's quite a lot of story. Kind of, I guess that each volume sort of equates to probably about as much plot as like a short BBC drama sort of season. So across like, sort of 6 volumes, it's quite a lot and a lot of scope to develop the characters, the world. There's very efficient storytelling, like it'll move through things quite quickly. There'll be a lot of information put into, or a lot of characterization put into a small bit of story. You'll frequently jump between storylines to always have lots going on at the same time. It's got quite a large cast. All these things are kind of, I think it's just really tightly plotted, characterized, gets a lot in the 6 volumes.
Yeah, the vague idea I've got is that they did their 6 volumes and then decided, I think both creators decided to go and do other things. And obviously it was a few years ago when the 6th book came out. I've heard interviews where, I think one recently with the artist Nick Patara, who also said that he and Hickman had discussed maybe someday doing more, and they would be sort of up for it. But I think the uber plot, I suspect, does sort of end at the end of Volume 5, or at least there's a very clear sort of stopping point. And then Volume 6 is a sort of a bit of an epilogue. Yeah,
Volume 6 is a sort of separate story that is entirely based in space, pretty much. 2 characters, Yuri Gagarin and Laika, the first dog in space, go off and have a sort of space-based adventure. Not too dissimilar from Guardians of the Galaxy, actually, that we discussed last time. I did wonder, as reading this on the tube, if someone looked over my shoulder, they'd probably think I was reading Guardians of the Galaxy comics because the film has been out recently.
It's okay, Alastair. Comics are cool now. Guardians of the Galaxy is a mainstream property.
Yeah.
No need to be ashamed.
No. Yeah, no need to be ashamed. But yeah, the last one has also got a different title, where it's called like Manhattan Projects: The Sun Beyond the Stars. And also it's sort of a self-contained story, mainly focusing on those 2 characters, doesn't jump to other locations or characters. And also it has a definite ending, in the sense that anything has a definite ending in the sort of comic that employs a Doctor Who level of mad stuff going on, where you can bring characters back from the dead and things like that. But yeah, it does have an ending.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of duplicates and alternate realities and stuff. So yeah, one of these things where is anyone really dead? Does it really matter? It's got a very sort of cocked eyebrow, wry tone to it, which lets it pull off a lot of this sort of askew history stuff and wild, sometimes slightly silly sci-fi in a way that works. It all seems consistent. It's impressive that it pulls off this entire tone, but it somehow does, and it's always entertaining.
Yeah, and a lot of the sort of jokes and stuff come from like exaggerated versions of historical figures. Like the JFK character appears at one point and he's even more of a scoundrel and a philanderer and a greasy politician, even more so than I think the real life JFK was. It was called Turned Up to 11, and there's various bits involving Harry Truman being involved in a strange cult, Masonic cult type thing. Various things like that. Like General Westmoreland is even more of a sort of bruiser than I think he was in real life. A lot of the jokes come from things turned up to 11.
Yeah, and maybe there's only so far you can go with keeping things at that level, I don't know. But for the 5 or 6 volumes they did it, I thought this was pretty good. It's probably among my favourite sort of genre comics of the early 2010s.
Yeah, well, they keep things moving. They sort of start with the end of the Second World War, and the main plot runs up to the assassination of JFK. They kind of bring in the space race, but sort of move things around to make it fit. I guess if they did more, there's more Cold War stuff they could do. They could space race and then go on into the 1970s and things like that. Yeah, it'd be interesting if they kind of just kept going and brought in Reagan and things like that, and other historical things, the H-bomb. There's lots of stuff they could bring in that they haven't.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll see that someday if they ever come back to it.
Yeah, I can strongly recommend this. It is good fun. It's got a real sort of epic sci-fi-ness to it. Yeah, the sort of Doctor Who is not a too distant comparison. It's got that crazy sci-fi-ness to it, and focus on character.
Yeah, it's got the same sort of manic energy, hasn't it? Obviously, it's slightly more, I don't know, I guess adult is the right word, or at least slightly more older skewing, but it's definitely got a similar energy.
Yeah. Anyway, I've been reading many volumes of Manhattan Projects. Nick, what have you been up to recently?
Well, recently, as in since the early days of 2023, I've been watching Justified, the neo-Western crime series starring Timothy Olyphant, which ran in the early 2010s, I think. And this is about Raylan Givens, a US Marshal who wears a cowboy hat and operates based on a sort of old Western code of right and wrong, who, is forced to return to his hometown to work as a marshal after he does a bit too much cowboy in the city where he'd been assigned elsewhere. And he comes back only to discover that he finds it a bit uncomfortable to be back among all these people that know him, and also that his old childhood nemesis Boyd Crowder is starting to rise up as a crime lord, and inevitably, this being a western, a lot of forces of the new world, people in suits with ways of exploiting everyone for money, are starting to descend on his sort of small, quiet hometown. Well, quiet, it's full of people doing meth and pulling off elaborate crime schemes, but it's a sort of country town, and there's a lot of people trying to exploit it for oil or to channel drugs through it and so on. And yes, Raylan Givens has to try and balance his desire to be a sort of old school cowboy lawman with the fact that he does work for the actual law as a US Marshal, and occasionally what he wants to do is not the right thing to do. And it's really good. I think it's pretty much found its place on the TV classics pantheon. I am, of course, as some may have guessed, finally watching this, having had it on the I'll do that someday list for years, because they are making a sort of sequel follow-up miniseries, Justified City Primeval. In, I think, a couple of months that's being released. So I'm halfway through Series 4 out of 6 at the moment. I live in vague hope of finishing Series 6 in time to watch City Primeval in a somewhat timely fashion.
Oh, sounds good. Yeah, this is one of those shows that's sort of talked about, sort of like as one of the, big premium drama shows in the point when TV kind of became the kind of dominant artistic medium. So how does it compare to some of, I guess, the other things that sometimes mentioned in the same breath as, I guess, like Sopranos and Breaking Bad being obvious comparisons because they're also crime stories?
I don't say this judgmentally, but Justified probably isn't aiming quite as high as those. It's not really a story about the depth of the human condition in quite the same way. It doesn't really, I don't think it's interested in digging into characterization quite as much. It is to an extent about Raylan Givens shooting criminals whilst looking cool and then having a few ethical dilemmas about whether he did the right thing by shooting that criminal. There's a bit of banter with the other police people. There's a sort of, increasingly as the series go on, a quite complex network of other crime families around his hometown of Harlan, who he has to sort of contend with, and it's very, very, very well done, and the dialogue is amazing. There's a lot of enjoyable sort of rambling, inane conversations between criminals before Raylan bursts in and starts trying to arrest them. It's a lot more entertaining, in a straightforward way, than shows like The Sopranos and Breaking Bad.
Oh, yeah, sounds good, though. Sounds good.
It's very good at what it does.
Yeah. No, it does, does sound like it, yeah. And, it's interesting you mentioned, I guess, like, change or with the money coming in from outside, because that is a big theme of the Western, going all the way back to the studio system. Yeah, and the old John Wayne and John Ford Westerns, there was always like newness represented usually by the town or the railroad coming to a minority, coming to the frontier represented by the lawman, the sheriff, and the cowboy. It seems like they picked up on those long established themes of the Western and translated it into a sort of modern audience or modern setting.
Yeah, they're playing that on two fronts to an extent, because like the locals in the town of Harlan are often sort of making remarks about Raylan, you know, what do you think you are, some sort of cowboy? As if he's the old-fashioned one. But on the other end, there's also, as I say, people in suits, often the sort of villains of each season, or the people paying the villains of each season to rock up and try and demolish the town for money, or get the entire town hooked on drugs for money. So yeah, they're working that theme from a couple of ends, I think.
Yeah, I guess it's another show exploring the meth crisis in America, especially sweeping through poor rural parts of America.
Yeah, very much that, yeah. And how some of the people who live there, who are part of the community, justify still selling them a lot of meth. Yeah, it's a good show. It's obviously, a lot of it is primarily, I guess, a vehicle for Timothy Olyphant to take the character he started in Deadwood and then sort of take it even further to become this sort of big, charismatic hero cowboy character who's the centre of the whole show. And he does very well, you know. It isn't just a thing you watch for Timothy Olyphant. As I say, there's a lot of good dialogue and good sort of light touch characterisation with everyone else as well. Like the main character's complex relationship with his father, who is a sort of local petty criminal, who he has this extremely charged, angry relationship with. There are a lot of other good characters as well, but there's definitely a lot of focus on Timothy Olyphant and his magnetic charisma, which he does live up to.
Yeah, I mean, he does Lawman very well, doesn't he? You know, he played a sort of similar character in a handful of episodes of The Mandalorian as well. Another, I guess, modern take on the Western.
Yeah, I think his role in Mandalorian, I imagine, was a certain amount of shout out to his previous cowboy-esque lawman roles.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah. That's what he does now, like it or not. I think after Deadwood and then this, I think he's established himself fairly well as Timothy Olyphant, cowboy.
Yeah, and yeah, well, Deadwood's a very good show, and it sounds like this is a very good show. So yeah, I mean, to be in two of the top discussed shows of the last, 20 years, it's a pretty impressive career. Just that alone. He has done other things, but yeah.
Yeah, no, he was in, what was it, the Santa Monica Diet on Netflix, in which he was doing comedy and doing it very well, actually. That show was fun. It was sadly cancelled on a cliffhanger by Netflix. What a surprise. But nonetheless, the 3 seasons they did were quite funny.
Cool, so yeah, we'll have to see if we cover this new season. I guess I've not seen any of the old show, but we could do a kind of comparison between what's it like to dive in fresh and what's it like if you know the backstory.
If you're up for it, I'm definitely planning on finishing Justified before City Primeval, so hopefully I'll manage that in a point where we can cover it in a vaguely timely fashion, but we'll see.
Watch this space to find out. Next up, this episode, we will be discussing Star Wars Visions, an anthology animated series of standalone short films set in the Star Wars universe, each one made by a different non-American animation studio. We have seen the 2023 season of this show, and we'll be counting down our favourite episodes as we did for past anthology shows. But first, Nick, what did you think of this show overall?
Overall, the second season of this, I actually thought was pretty good and fun. I liked the wide range of animation styles. I thought they did a decent job of finding different stories. I do slightly feel like watching something like this does slightly expose the slightly narrow nature of this universe. Like, watching a lot of these shorts in fairly short succession, it's possible to think, oh, another lightsaber battle, okay. And on the one hand, you're an animation studio doing your one and only official Star Wars story. Of course you want to have a lightsaber battle. On the other hand, yeah, as I say, binging them, it does sometimes make it verge on samey. Nonetheless, they are all very well done, and as I say, the range of animation is good, and none of the ones in Season 2 are bad.
Yeah, I do feel that there is lightsaber sameness across the project. I mean, I watched the first season as well as the one which we're about to discuss, and I felt that first season had more generic Jedi stories.
I was getting to that, yeah.
Yeah, and they did after a while start to sort of blur together, despite the fact the different animation styles and things like that. It did feel like there was a lot of people discovering that they have force powers, or a lot of someone knocking around with their Jedi Master encountering a random Sith.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to try and focus on praising the second season rather than slagging the first. But yeah, I did think the second season was a big step up on the first one, because the first one had a slightly worse lean on slightly samey Jedi power discovery stories. And also the animation styles weren't as varied. I felt like a lot of them, not all of them, there were a couple of interesting ones, but a lot of season one lived in a very sort of roughly similar anime-inspired territory, which, when you're also doing quite samey stories, does add to the air of saying.
Yeah, I felt there was more visual experimentation in the second season. What I did really like about this is that the stories do really cover the breadth of the Star Wars in-universe timeline. They, don't just stick to the periods explored by the films. Although, yeah, there are ones that set, either during the Clone Wars or set during the time when the Jedi's in hiding from the Empire. But they do also go, like, for example, like right back into the earlier history of the universe. Some of them are set like way before the Phantom Menace, kind of in territory where previously only explored by like books and video games. So some of it is kind of like really digging back into the Star Wars history, which I liked that they kind of explored that rich timeline more than just focusing on things that fit around the films that most people have seen.
Yeah, I mean, the ones I liked in this, I think, were the ones that, maybe explored the notion that there's more things to do in the Star Wars universe than just either become a Jedi or just sit at home being a loser. I think there's a few stories here about people who work as miners or people trying to be artists or dancers and other things, and I thought those were the more interesting ones for me, especially after watching season 1, because I watched these all in order, all of season 1, then all of season 2. So by the end of season 1 I was somewhat burnt out on Jedi apprentices, so I was happy to see that season 2 featured a bit more variation of people in general.
Yeah, and I did like the focus on non-American animation studios. It really gave an international flavour to this show. There's sort of a range of different voices, stories, styles. So it kind of made it more visually distinctive.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. It was lovely to see Aardman pop up. I hadn't quite realised that they qualified as an animation studio in this context, and I hadn't done any research, so I didn't realise there was an Aardman one until the little title card popped up saying Aardman Presents. But a lot of fun to see them go for so much variation.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't dug into the history of the studios. I think some of them are quite well known in Japan for anime. There's certainly a lot that are riffing on Japanese cinema and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of very cool anime styles. Some of the anime ones did look gorgeous. I think there was one in season 1 with 2 twins fighting, which looks cool. And there was the first one in season 1, which was a Japanese studio, but I think something a bit away from the sort of anime look. Visually amazing.
Yeah, it was looked like a Kurosawa film or something like that. Or was at least riffing on an anime that was riffing on a Kurosawa film in the way that things all feed back to themselves. In the way that, The Matrix is a noir based on animes and mangas that are based on American noirs. Yeah, there's that element to it. And, I did thought the one with the twins, which was very much a sort of anime kind of crazy powers, kind of defying physics one. But that was at least visually interesting.
Yeah, although did suffer from the slight problem some short stories have where they seem to sort of finish on a cliffhanger, with a sort of the rest of the story is still to come. It's like, where?
Yeah. I always find that, also even writing short stories and things like that, some of them kind of fall down into two, either basically the short story is clearly the beginning bit of a much longer story or the end bit. Usually they work better if they're the end bit, or basically the short story kind of feels like the last scene of a movie, but you don't need to know the rest of the movie because it's got the crucial bit in it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the ones I liked better, and I'm guessing we'll get to this, were the ones that felt like they did contain themselves entirely within themselves and you didn't need to watch anything else.
Yeah. Which usually, again, the best way to go with short film or short story.
I mean, as far as I'm aware, none of these are continuing any continuity or anything. None of these, apart from a couple of cameos, which don't really matter, have existing characters in major roles, which I'm sure was part of the brief.
Yes, yeah. I mean, my Star Wars knowledge isn't total, but there was no main character recognised from any Star Wars film, video game, or book or extended media that I've consumed. They're all original creations. Some of them were, in fact, creating whole new periods in the Star Wars history, I guess, because they focus on characters who are leaders or things like that. So, carving out new plot seems to be part of this, yeah.
Yeah, and again, some of them do a good job of going into interesting new territories. So, fair enough. There's some good visions here. As I say, if I was giving a recommendation, I would perhaps suggest skipping Series 1. I found it a bit of a slog. Although the episode, was it Toby 1 with the little cute child robot, was good.
Yeah, that's sort of Disney-ish animation style.
Yeah, but a lot of the rest of Season 1, I must admit, I found hardish work. Soz.
Right. We're going to count down, as is tradition, with things like Love, Death and Robots and the rest of it.
Yep, let's praise Season 2. Let's do it. Okay, so top 3?
Top 3, yeah.
I've got a quick honourable mention.
Go for it.
The Bandits of Golak, it was very much coin flip. To be honest, I'm tempted to just say joint third, because I really struggled to choose which one to cut from the list. But Bandits of Golak, which was the one about the two siblings on a train, travelling through a landscape, and then on the one hand, yes, more kids discovering their powers, but still the animation, although at times a bit video gamey, was still very, very slick and did a great job carrying the story. And the relationship between the two main characters was very, very well done within the space. This is one of the few ones where I felt like I really cared about the characters by the end. So strong work.
Yeah, again, if there's you can get a good character relationship across quickly. That usually leads to good stuff and praise, and I will come to that in some of my favourite ones. I guess if I do a quick honourable mention, which is very close to a joint third, was Ayu's song.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I just thought just a beautiful, sweet little story, and I just love the animation, the sort of felt style, sort of puppet type people. Just very beautiful.
Yeah, no, this was very close to being in for me as well. This is probably, I guess, honorary 5th place or something.
Yeah.
Mostly just for the strength of the animation, which looks lovely.
Right, okay, so rolling on to the official top 3. Nick, do you want to go first?
Right, okay. Number 3 for me was the first one in the series. That was Sith. This is about, I sort of hinted at it earlier, this is about a former Sith who has left to retire to their sort of void-like studio and become an artist. And this is a double win for me, but the animation is absolutely lovely. It's sort of slick and computer-generated, but in a very sort of colourful, slightly abstract way that sort of reflects the character's artistic aspirations, and the story is quite fun and, quite nicely sort of vague and literary and symbolic about what the character wants to be. So I liked the execution of it. I liked the idea of a former Sith who's gone to become an artist. I just enjoyed this.
Yeah, I really like this one as well. Not to jump out of the sequence, but I put this as number 2. Yeah, I thought this was really good for the exact reasons you said. I really like the animation, the kind of bringing in the paint and the art and things like that, the sort of hand-drawn brushstrokes and things like that style of it. It just looked absolutely gorgeous. My favourite ones all had a sort of distinctive visual style to them, but this one really just maxed out on just looking stunning and really creative art direction and visuals. And there's a sort of, quite simple story at the core, but it tells a self-contained story and has a climax, and the lightsaber fight looks cool. I like this one bit when she draws a lightsaber and it kind of looks like a streak of paint rather than the regular lightsaber, so things like that. And this is also one that actually deals into a kind of more obscure bit of the Star Wars timeline, so kind of really ticking all the boxes there.
Must admit, I'm not fan enough to tell you exactly where it fell in the timeline, but still enjoyable enough even without that knowledge. So
my number 3 was, we've already discussed it briefly, I Am Your Mother, the one created by Aardman Animation. Partly as a Brit, it's a source of national pride that Aardman, this kind of tiny little scrappy studio, has international profile for making lovable, silly stories with clay, as well as just being Aardman. I just thought this one had a really sweet little story to it. Again, it did a job of telling a self-contained story well. So in that, it's just a straight up story of a kid who's embarrassed by their mum and then they compete in a race together and bond. It's a really tight, I think it's only 13 minutes, and tells a really tight little story with an adventure and some good jokes. So very good work from Aardman there.
I too have this on my list. We'll get to it.
Yes.
Right, so that was your number 3. So my number 2?
Yep, go for it.
Was The Spy Dancer. The one about the secret rebel who worked as a sort of dancer. And I really liked the animation on this. It was quite smooth and minimalist and maybe quite comic-y in a way, which might be or quite similar to some comic artists I liked. But it had a very sort of fluid style, which really worked with the dancing. The action sequences felt kind of unique. I liked the idea of these sort of off-duty stormtroopers. And it had a good sort of twist ending that made it feel a bit more substantive after a good high-concept action scene. So I really enjoyed this. I thought this worked on every level it was trying to.
Yeah, another good one. Another beautiful animation style. Again, I mean, this might be what we say for all of them, but I felt this one was definitely like a sort of contained story. Told a story that just sort of worked as a unit in itself. Yeah, as you say, it's digging into the world a bit more to seeing what stormtroopers get to when they're off duty. Yeah, this was a very, very nice.
Yeah, I've already done your number 2.
I've already done my number 2, so that's Sith, which we both praised. And all right, do you want to reveal your top one?
Well, fans of deductive reasoning may have already got this, but my number 1 is, of course, I Am Your Mother from Aardman, which maybe this makes me a simple childlike being, but I just quite enjoyed the sort of combination of gentle silliness and a sweet, funny, clear story, lots of little jokes, lots of enjoyable background Easter eggs. I liked that she was using a Mandalorian mask as a welding mask. That was silly.
Yeah.
And I just really like this. Another one where the character relationship was simple but effectively portrayed enough for me to really feel it by the end of the, as Alastair said, quite short 13-minute runtime. I mean, I don't know, but maybe this says something about the fact that Star Wars is something that works, at least for me, best when it's kept these sort of fairly simplistic stories of childish wonder, and a lot of the ones that try to turn it into a more serious, straight-faced mythic battle sometimes fall a bit flat for me. But I really liked this. Number 1.
Yeah, and also one of the few that basically has no Jedi or Force-related stuff in there, like, at all.
It's possible that may have helped,
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I mean, yeah, Star Wars leans on the Jedi a bit too much, really. Like, Andor, possibly one of the best bits of Star Wars media in recent years, with Jedi basically absent. But yeah, I mean, I think it's no surprise that Aardman do, like, tight, short film really well. But yeah, lovely to see them doing this in the Star Wars universe. So rolling on to my number one, which we've not mentioned so far, which is Screecher's Reach, the second one in the second season. So yeah, I love the animation style from this. It was really, really beautiful style. I mean, the plot line, it was another sort of discovering Force powers, but I just thought the way they kind of brought the Ghost character to life as a sort of evil Sith was really quite, intense and scary. I thought it had a really good sort of plot line of just backwater place that everyone wants to get away from. The characters offered a way out, but has to leave their friends behind. There's a kind of strong emotional bit from that. The story arc of someone stepping outside their childhood sort of coming of age story really worked. And yeah, the animation was beautiful. So yeah, it was quite moving.
Yeah, no, this was really good. The animation was great, and I liked the way it did the sort of horror elements, or the sort of vaguely scary elements with the old Sith living in the cave.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was definitely nicely done. I think the ending lost me a bit. I think I found it slightly strange, which may possibly be why it didn't quite make my top four, but this was definitely another good one. But to be honest, as I say, the whole of season 2 is pretty good for the most part. There's not really a super weak link.
No, exactly, yeah. Yeah, I think the character design, as you say, like especially in the Sith, and also, worked really well. So it was moving, it was good. So yeah, interesting. We've got a range of options, so we've gone for different ones, which I suppose shows the sort of the strength of the show if we've chosen, diverse ones.
Well, yeah, it appears the unified MFV favourites are I Am Your Mother and Sith, anyway. Those seem to be the two we've gone for.
Yeah, they're definitely our favourites, yeah. I guess we both mentioned Adu's song as an almost honourable mention. But I'm happy to have, and if we're going to have a unified top three, I'm happy to have The Spy Dancer as number 3.
Okay.
It was good for those who want to know what order to watch them in.
I mean...
to make sure you get only our favourites.
I mean, there's no continuity really, so watch them in whatever order you want. But yeah, those seem to be 3 of the best.
Finally, this episode, we will be discussing World Tree, a new comic from James Tynion IV and Fernando Blanco. When a teenage boy named Gibson Lane commits and live streams a spree of brutal murders, questions are raised by the police, his brother, and a tech billionaire who might know something about the dark online origins of what caused this. We've read the first issue of this new comic. Nick, what did you think of it?
Interesting start. It's very much a modern comics first issue, but we're very much in the first 10-15 minutes of the movie here. It sort of sets up a few characters, hints at the wider mysteries, and tries to establish the broad sort of point and tone of the series, which obviously in this case is internet equals scary. Like, internet horror has been around almost as long as the internet, There's been films with titles like Killer Net since the 90s, I think. Honestly, the risk is, with a lot of these, is they end up looking dated. If anything, the clever move by Tynion here might be making the horror kind of auto-dated, as it's something that's sort of come back from the 2000s. Hence why it's all sort of named in, 2000s era leet speak. Yeah, the series is called World Tree, which is named after a forum from the time, and the villain is called Fear, spelt with a PH and a number 3. Yeah, it's maybe trying to protect itself from becoming dated by doing that, and yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, the internet and the corrupting effect it has on people is one of the scary things of modern times, and it'll be interesting to see if Tynion can make this into a sort of scary horror story with an evil villain without denying, the existence of human evil.
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic, the really scary thing are people doing nasty things. Is the story going to find a way to connect the sort of sci-fi or supernatural horror elements with also just how terrifying people are, especially on the internet when they're released from all social obligations and niceties? But yeah, I think the best thing about this is it's kind of digging into a lot of our contemporary fears and concerns about the internet and kind of what it's become. I mean, platforms that are algorithm driven, are known for pushing people down extreme rabbit holes, whether it's extreme productivity or extreme politics. And, obviously we're concerned about how that has led to actual real world violence. Everything from massacres that have happened recently to the January the 6th attacks, QAnon, Pizzagate. There's a lot of scary stuff on the internet, and this has very much got a young kid, vulnerable young person, who's committed a series of murders because of something he's seen on a internet platform. It's, it's very much a parable for, something like QAnon or Pizzagate.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, the scary thing about this is that it's almost hard to imagine how you get to that place. And there's a nice sort of effect in the art wherein there's just the way he's killing people is by showing them some unimaginable thing or something on the screen of his phone, which causes like reality itself to fritz out through a series of quite nicely done artifacts. Like the way the art starts with this sort of quite realistic within a certain comic-y scale of realism, and then it sort of fritzes out as the sort of weird internet or undernet stuff starts to sort of exert pressure on the world around it, which is quite nicely done, especially during the end when there's one page where the world just goes batshit.
Yeah. That was well done. Beautiful bit of art design and style. Quite a clever like stylistic trick. Yeah, and I liked how like the weird sort of effect would kind of like burst out of the panel as well, distort the page itself. I thought that was quite a clever use of comics as a medium.
Well, yeah, especially because it's quite rigid the rest of the time. It's quite a sort of solid grid, except when this sort of undernet effect happens and then it fritzes and jumps around.
Yeah, which is good. And also it's tapping into some of these sort of retro horror things with the idea of something possessed being within the internet, which they call the undernet, as you mentioned, which is, I guess, a good allusion to the underworld or something like that, both in terms of the underworld of the dark side of the internet, or the underworld as in Hades and things like that, kind of supernatural underworld. So it's bringing up elements of that as well, and then referencing back to the 90s. It's interesting that it's got several characters who've been online for a while, so they're actually talking about different iterations of the internet. There's flashback to the sort of 90s early aughts, a much more primitive form of the internet, and something that happened then. There's one character who even says something along the lines of, when I was young, being an internet edgelord was, a lot less dangerous than it is now, or something like that. And mentioning like, the golden age of 4chan and things like that. So yeah, it's a very internet literate story, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think what pushes this above KillerNet and so on is that it's clearly being written by someone who has grown up online in the way a lot of us have, and is able to write a story about the internet that actually makes it clear that he's actually, used the internet and understands it and has some grasp of the culture and the evolution of it and the way it works. And that's what makes it seem like he might actually have something to say about it beyond, ooh, isn't it scary?
Yeah. I'm starting also to feel old when also you can have a story that has two iterations kind of the internet in it. There's like a backstory. The internet has been dominating popular culture long enough that you can have a story about modern internet. Instagram and Facebook apps are kind of mentioned with flashbacks to when characters were young with an older version of the internet, which is just makes me feel that like this thing's been around for a while. To be honest, actually, that whole kind of flashback to some kids who dealt with something evil and nasty when they were a child that's now coming back and they're grown-ups also really reminded me of It as well. So I guess, it's a horror comic, so it's obviously, and set in a small town, so riffing on Stephen King is not unexpected. In fact, it's very welcome.
Yeah, and in this case, the evil thing is manifested as this sort of heavily tattooed naked woman, which I don't think is a massive spoiler because she's on the cover.
Yeah.
Which, is, I don't know, again, it's one of these things where you have to go, well, it's a strong image. And obviously, as a comic creator, Tiny and Blanco have, successfully put together a memorable visual for a villain. And exactly why it is the way it is something I assume we'll find out. I mean, is there a relevance to, the villain being a naked woman, considering the dominance of pictures of naked women on the internet? Is that a comment Tiny is making? Or is that too surface level? Who knows?
Well, yeah, exactly. That is a entire possibility. Or is it that this is a non-human character, or something that's non-human is taking human form, which is why it doesn't understand human stuff about social mores about wearing clothes and not committing horrific acts of violence.
Yeah, I mean, Tiny has said before that he feels that some sort of modern fantasy comics, I listen to a lot of comics podcasts, guys, sorry. So yeah, I've heard interviews with Tiny where he's spoken about the fact that a lot of recent like fantasy sci-fi comics do sort of real-world based fantasy stories and have a bad habit of therefore having made characters who don't really have anything visual or iconic about them. One of the things he's tried to do with a lot of his books is actually create characters who have something memorably visual about them, even if they are, characters who exist in a semi-real world, which I think is what he's trying to do with the Thea character here.
Yeah, making them distinctive. Yeah, you don't want your villain just to be, I don't know, a person in a suit.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of comics from the sort of Western genre comics arena have the advantage of their lead characters being superheroes who have these big silly costumes which have a certain memorable iconic value. So yeah, the challenge I guess Tynion's talking about is doing that even without superheroes existing as a convention.
But yeah, and obviously you want some, an arresting image, and yeah, it's very distinctive, it's powerful, draws you in, sets up a mystery about what is this character, what do they want, why are they doing what they did, what effect do they have on this kid. I guess the main character's younger brother, there's a lot of mystery thrown out, which is I guess to intrigue the reader and make them and want to read on because it's the first chapter of an ongoing story.
Yeah, and as someone who's, occasionally reads articles about internet culture and strokes his chin, I do then find myself thinking at what point he's making. Like, if the concept is that whatever's bad about the internet was seeded in the early days, is that something about, the fact that the internet has this sort of underbelly of hardcore nerds who've been on there from the beginning and have formed a sort of bitter 4chan underside, or would they have been there anyway, even if everyone had joined the internet at the same time? Who knows?
Yeah, or is it the base motivation of people on the internet is making money and exploiting each other, or something like that, as that comes to life? So yeah, I mean, I guess that's what the metaphor will be, I guess, completed as the story pans out. But yeah, you can kind of see where it's going from what it explores early on. I mean, also, I guess one thing we're very concerned about is the effect the internet's having on young men, radicalizing them in sort of, dark and terrifying ways. And obviously, yeah, this is, it begins pretty much with a teenage boy committing a series of horrific murders. So again, it's riffing on a contemporary fear.
Yeah, and much like Tynion did with Department of Truth, which he also wrote, of course, which was another, Jesus Christ, I'm scared about things happening in the modern world horror comic.
Yeah, and also riffing on conspiracies and things like that, which is, again, another modern obsession. We're kind of going through a golden age of conspiracies, if you want to call it that.
God bless these times.
Yeah, well, as people pointed out, in the sort of early 20th century, there was also, and late 19th century, when there was rampant inequality and a lot of, rapid social and technological change, there was also a golden age of conspiracy theories. And so it's come around again, but, it's a political concern from, everything like, say, like Pizzagate, QAnon, and we're seeing these political concerns reflected in art as a way of, addressing the things and ideas that are bubbling around in society coming to the surface.
Yeah, it's all very upsetting. As I say, I'm interested to see where it goes. One of the things about reviewing just the first issue of comics is, all you can sort of say is, interesting start, let's see where it goes. Part of me feels it could maybe have had a slightly stronger climax at the very end of the issue, but apart from that, yeah, it successfully intrigued me.
Has it been announced how many issues the whole story will be?
No, I don't think he's announced the cap. I think this isn't a short miniseries. I think this is meant to be an ongoing series, or at least a mid-length ongoing series that will run for at least a couple of years or something. Department of Truth is still going. That's up to issue 25, 26 or something now. So yeah, I think this is meant to go for at least a while. He may well have an ending in mind. I mean, maybe he'll announce it a bit, but it's finishing with issue 12. But it's certainly not finishing in the near future.
Right, okay. Well, this might be something we come back to, because I certainly enjoyed it and would like to read more.
Okay, cool. See you in a bit, World Tree. Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you very much for listening as ever. If you have enjoyed the process of listening to this podcast, you could also embark on the process of going to our website at moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find the rest of our episodes, articles written by both of us, and much more besides. And if you're still happy after that, why not leave us a nice review on your podcast application of choice? 5 stars, please, and thank you.
You can also get more from us on social media. Best place to go is Twitter, where we're at MFV Podcast. You can also follow us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. You can get more from me on Twitter, where I'm at Alastair J.R. Ball, and the best place to go for my other writing is at redtrainblog.com.
And you can get more from me at NickNB on Twitter or nickbryan.com. If you go to any of my social media platforms at the moment, you will mostly hear me talking about Stone Cop, my new Kickstarter comic with Phil Apley about a stone cop pounding the pavements, fighting rock trolls, and uncovering the dark secrets of his origin. We're about halfway through it at this point. We're doing pretty well. We're coming up to the sort of 2/3 mark, but we could always use a big push so that there's less of a blood pressure inducing rush at the end, so please back Stone Cop. I would very much appreciate it. The comic will be good, I promise. Thank you very much.
I've backed, and recommend you all to do so, because I'm excited to read this, so I wanted to get it funded so I can read it.
Yep, Alastair's backed, and you should too. And you should also come back next episode for Moderate Fantasy Violence, when we'll be covering 2 of the big releases of the year, with Succession Season 4 and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Oh yep. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.